Noting the hour and the presence of a quorum, I call the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee to order. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting online may use ActonTV's YouTube channel found at the top of the agenda. This meeting is also being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. I don't have anything for the chairman's welcome for once, just thanks to Amy who pinch hit for me while I was out having old people problems. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to say? Hello, Tessa.
I just wanted to note that I will not be running for re-election in May, as much as it pains me to not do that because I actually sickly really enjoy this job. But it takes a lot of time, and I think that in order to do this job effectively, you have to have the time and the headspace in order to put towards that time. So I just wanted to say thank you for my 6 years on this committee, and encourage others who are considering running and those who are already on the committee, since I sense that come next fall, this is going to be a very green committee, that to encourage you to get involved in the committees and subcommittees and things that make you uncomfortable and that might be unfamiliar to you. I was terrified of being on budget, like terrified, and also terrified of speaking in front of people. And, you know, it's a good place to take risks and to do the things that make you uncomfortable, because you should leave school committee being able to talk with ease about the budget and with ease about the sort of policies and direction that our school district is going. And I think that in order to do that, you have to serve on those subcommittees. So I would just, my parting words are to get involved in those kinds of things and really throw yourself into it as long as you are on school committee. So thank you.
Hi, Evan, and then Evelyn.
Yeah, I would say the similar thing as Tessa. So due to the time limit in the foreseeable future, I would say I would decide not to run for the re-election. But I'd like to take this opportunity to thank you, a lot of Peter and a lot of staffs, and for many presentations, a lot of teaching, coaching. Yeah, thank you all for the support. And I also allowing me to serve you. Yeah, I wish the best to the rest of the committee in the coming years, and also best to the administration, leadership, and the district too. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. I also want to just say that I would not be running for re-election. It's been a joy to be afforded the opportunity by the residents of Boxborough to serve them. I had a really good time. I thoroughly enjoyed my time on the committee. My job is kicking in the post-pandemic mode, and travel is beginning to get hectic for me again, and I don't think that I will be an effective member of the committee if I can devote the same amount of time that I did in the beginning to this work, which is very important. Thank you to all the previous chairs and to my colleagues and to the current chair, Peter, Deb, Marie, Dave, all of you and John, of course, who was a good mentor when I first joined the committee, for all of your leadership and your support and your mentorship on the committee. I really enjoyed it. The only thing that I would like to say is that I hope that people step up and run. I hope people of color step up and run. I hope people in the African community step up and run, because like I like to say, there are different shades of black. One black experience does not mirror the other. And so if you want to have a seat at the table, you want to have your voice echoed, you want to have your ideas considered, you have to run for school committee. That is the only way we can make a difference in this town and in this district. The demographic of our district is changing, and hopefully we can see a new crop of school committee leaders that will depict that demographic, that changing demographic, that would have a voice at the table to make sure that our kids, our most marginalized kids, are well taken care of.
Thank you. Thank y'all. Everybody's cool? No other announcements? All right, very good, y'all. Next up, we have our ABRHS student representative update. I think I see 3 student representatives here. Please, if either of y'all have anything to report, please come up to the mic. Hello, Molly.
Hi, I'm Molly. I'm a sophomore. I want to start off by saying thank you to everybody who's leaving. Thank you for being on this committee. I think it's very important for just the survival of the community for people to engage themselves. Anyways, today I wanted to talk about free periods, which is something at the high school that has been seen as controversial between students and teachers and just administration and everything. And I think a few months ago, Principal Dean decided that, and I know it probably wasn't just her decision, I'm sure there were other people involved too, but there was a decision made that instead of teachers being allowed to give their students frees when they're out, they were now required to request a sub, and I think I agree with that decision. I think an unscheduled free can be very exciting for students, and I think it's not great for the learning environment. But I also know that there's been some talk of getting rid of scheduled frees, and I think scheduled frees are very important. Some of you may know that I was out of school for a few months last year for mental health reasons, and one of those reasons is that I was getting so overwhelmed with school and just being at school for 7 hours a day and just having to deal with that. It was just a lot for me. And having a free this year, because I'm a sophomore now and I can, and just having that break in my day, even if it's just an hour, and even if it's just me sitting in a different part of the school, I think it's just really helped me be able to calm down my day and make it through the day a lot better than I was able to last year. And I've already made it farther into this school year than I did last year, so I think that's important. And I'm also in ASC, which is the Academic Support Center, and so I do homework there too. So I think it's important to acknowledge that that is a good homework place, but just having the ability to not be in a classroom for an hour every day has it's been really helpful for me. So I also think, sorry, that for students with jobs, especially juniors, but I have a job and I'm a sophomore, it's important that we have a point in our day where we can get homework done, because lots of juniors and everybody who has a job and works on weeknights don't get the chance to get their homework done in school because they don't have a free or something. And I think frees are very important in just getting students through the day and making sure they have some time at the end of the day after school to just cool down and decompress. So thank you.
Welcome.
Hello, committee. I'm Diksha, and I'm a freshman. And I would like to thank those of you for who are not going to get reelected for your service. I'm sure the community really appreciates it. I would like to talk about Valentine's Day at the high school, which is an exciting event for a lot of people. So I know that the chorus is doing singing Valentines. They go to English classrooms and they sing songs, which may be a bit embarrassing for some, but it's a fun experience for all. And the student council is also selling carnations as well. 3 colors: red is lover, pink is friendship, and our most favorite, the juiciest one, secret admirer. So, so happy very early Valentine's Day to you all, because I don't think I'll be seeing you again this month. So enjoy your Valentine's Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Diksha. That's awesome. Do we have any other reports? Yes, go for it.
Molly, I just want to applaud you for your bravery. I think that it's really a big deal to come to these meetings anyway as a representative and to get up in front of adults and other students and TV cameras and everything else and share with us what's important at the high school. But I think that the reality of mental health for high school students isn't brought up enough, and I just really applaud you and thank you for sharing that.
And happy Valentine's Day to y'all. Looking forward to hearing about the spicy carnation deliveries. I'm always learning something new about the high school. Thanks so much. All right, up next is public participation per school committee policy BEDH. Members of the public, hello, Mr. Peterson. Members of the public are invited to speak for up to 3 minutes, Mr. Peterson, regarding items that are not on the agenda. For items on the agenda, the public is asked to please wait for that item. Speakers must be recognized by the chair, I see you, Mr. Peterson, before speaking. The committee does not typically respond to comments during public participation.
John Peterson, 6 Jackson Drive. I had the pleasure of serving with Tessa, Yeben, and Evelyn on the school committee, and I also thank them for their service. As they all noted, it is a tremendous commitment and a tremendous responsibility. With the announcements of these candidates not running, that means that there will be 4 new members of the school committee next year. That's more than a third of the committee. And I want to encourage everybody that we need not lose all of that experience and institutional knowledge. So for everybody who's running for school committee, I encourage you to reach out not only to the sitting members, but also to those members who will be going off the committee so they can share their experiences and their learnings with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? All right, very good. Thank you so much. Mr. Light, do you have an update for us?
Sure. Well, good evening, everyone. I'll just start by saying thank you to all of you who, have been serving the committee for so long. I know you're not running again. I actually think it's 5 members, if I've been keeping tally correctly over the last several weeks, whose seats are up for re-election. So that's certainly is going to be significant turnover. I just want to say from our perspective as administration, we really appreciate the fact that you're giving hundreds of hours a year to this role and the amount of time and energy that you do, and this is a volunteer role. And I know that once you're elected and seated, there's few community members who now see you as volunteers because you are the governing body for the district, and that's a huge responsibility, and I really appreciate all the different perspectives and ideas and lenses that you bring to this work. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. I know you're not done, so you're not going anywhere yet, but I certainly just want to recognize that and say thank you, because I think, more than ever, it's actually the partnership between the superintendent and the school committee that allows for the district to work effectively at the governance level, because it's the relationship that we have to maintain that allows us to continue to be productive for the kids. And I've really appreciated all the work that I've been able to do with you, and so thank you, and you will be missed. I also want to just recognize that we're kicking off Black History Month in our schools and in the community. I'm going to be sharing some of the work that our schools are doing over the course of the month in the newsletter with families, so I'm not going to do it all right now because I know we have some things to do. But also as we talk to the high school, some of the ongoing work that they've actually been doing to weave Black history throughout all of their curriculum over every month. So I'm excited to share that with you as in this next newsletter that I'm putting out hopefully tomorrow. I want to call your attention, I know it's a little early for the FYI section, but we included a memo from Deb Bookus in the FYI section of this school committee packet. As you are aware, there was a genocide education bill that went through the legislature last year. We wanted to put together some information for you and the community about all the ways that the district is addressing that. We actually surpass the requirements of the new bill, and we have for a long time, but we wanted to codify that and really put it in one place for you so you were aware and could share that with anyone really who asks, what is the district doing around genocide education? I also am really pleased to let you know, as you're aware, I had sent out some information about forming a committee of a group of stakeholders in our schools, students, staff, community members, administration, families, to address the problem that we've had with hate speech and bias speech in our schools and in the community. I'm really excited to report that we have 67 applicants to that leadership team, and they range all sorts of student organizations at the high school, community members, the rabbi at Beth Elohim is interested in participating. Our consultant from the Leadership Academy that we've been working with for 2 years actually asked if she could, even though she's not in our community. And so just a great range of stakeholders who have signed up for this. We're really excited to get that going. I think the hardest part is going to be that we can't have a leadership team of 67 people. It's a little too big to work with, and we're going to have to figure out how we're going to narrow that down from 67 to probably somewhere around 20 to 25 people maximum. But certainly if we can't select people, we already have a number of ideas about how they can still be engaged in this work as we move forward. So just more to come on that, and we will certainly get word out. I want to thank Ben and Liz, who have sent me information so far and requests to participate in that as school committee members. So right now I'm carrying both of you on that. If anyone else wanted to participate, I might be able to take one more school committee member. After that, we have to start worrying about quorum issues. But you know, if you are interested, please let me know, because I think we have an opportunity to do something that's really impactful for our kids and for our community with this group. So thank you. All right, and I will turn it back to you, Kyra.
Thank you, Peter. We are off to the races with ongoing business. I believe Mr. Verdolino has a second quarter financial report for us.
I'll just, you know, as Dave gets going here, I just want to thank Dave for being able to get this together. Marie, Dave, and I spent probably the better part of 3 days since our last meeting just looking at all-day kindergarten and making sure that we had reconciled all of the, you know, data, numbers, information about that, and we could present that to you tonight in a way. So we were able to get that out. I just want to recognize for Mr. Peterson that, you know, this information was not in the packet earlier, but our finance team has done an incredible job, and it's not just Dave, but his whole team, of being able to simultaneously really focus on all-day K and what we could do there, but also get this update to you. So you didn't see it ahead of time. I know it was emailed to you earlier today, but Dave, thank you so much for getting this together.
Yeah, apologies for that. That is essentially the notes I had on this slide. Was you received the customary reporting package, unfortunately, just today and not in ample time. So I'll possibly walk through a little bit more detail than I ordinarily would if I knew that you'd had plenty of time to look at this. What I'm going to talk about is projected budget surpluses on the revenue side, what we've captured to date. Basically 5 revenue components not being either of the 2 towns' assessments. Chapter 78, we've known this from the beginning of the year. We budgeted $30 minimum aid per student. The governor one-timed it to $60 per student for FY23. Regional transportation, that's an estimate based on our information. The final rate, the final reimbursement rate, will be out in June, and so it typically has been higher, and with the state in good shape financially, it could be higher, but that's pretty close to budget. Excuse me. Charter reimbursement is up a little bit from a previous estimate. They update that during the year. The final numbers are not until the end of the year. And as I always say, the charter reimbursement revenue is offset by assessments for the charter program. And so we're a little bit to the good on a net basis, but for the revenue component itself, we're up over $100,000 versus budget. Medicaid is not as earth-shattering as last year when we had the COVID adjustment and had a significant windfall as far as revenue surplus, but there's a little bit of that COVID adjustment that still hasn't wound its way through the reimbursement process. And the champ at this point in the year is investment earnings. I was talking to Marie and showing her the, just walking through this particular slide. And, you know, she said, wow, that's quite a bit. And I said, well, yeah, when you're earning 4% one year versus 0.1% in the prior year, it certainly does make a difference. And so that's going to produce a lot of surplus over what we had budgeted. And so when you add everything up on the revenue side, we're projecting now, so this is not a snapshot, but this is a projection to year end of $771,000 to the good on the revenue side, compared with all of last year was $437. The components can fluctuate. You can see that as a percent of the total, they're in the customary range of somewhere between 0.5% and 1%. I got the thought that I could graph the components over a multi-year period of time, just to try and pictorially show the variation. But I got about this far, and that's what the data looked like, and I just abandoned it and said, no, that's not going to work. When you aggregate everything, however, and look at the net revenue surplus for all of the components together, it does form a pretty reasonable comparison. FY21 was the COVID year, when the state level funded Chapter 70, when the federal government, my battery's running low, I better speed this up. Did you do that? Oh, thank you. So the COVID year notwithstanding, we've had pretty healthy revenue surpluses, and as you see, we're projecting at the end of this year to be about the record setter in the 5-year process, which occurred in 2018. So the point of this is that it's not an unusual thing to have $500,000 or more of revenue surplus versus budget. On the expense side, these are the major categories where we've identified a projected variance. And again, this isn't where we are right now, but where we estimate we'll be at the end of the fiscal year. You can see the categories. I won't read them out long. They're the typical categories that have major budget variances. And when we aggregate, I should say that the other special ed is transportation costs that were not able to be serviced by our collaborative. And there were some significant costs this year that were unanticipated. And that's one of the biggest negative numbers on this presentation. So as of now, we project a $300,000 deficit in the expense side. We'll have to close that. We're not allowed to overspend on a net basis. You can see that last year we were about $350,000 to the good. Typically, this is our low water mark in the projection process, and we typically get better from here to the end of the year. Personnel, individual personnel on leave of absences that don't come back, things like that happen. We release encumbrances, and so typically we do better once the year progresses through year end. And so if we were to project what the turnback looks like, as I said, budget projections typically improve after the second quarter. The second quarter revenue projection would be the tops in the 5-year average. There are always unforeseen conditions that can occur. But based on the information that we have, we're projecting revenues somewhere between $700,000 and $1 million to the good. The number that I gave you tonight was 771. I honestly can't think of what would reduce it, but I just want to be realistic and say 700 to $1 million is probably somewhere where we would end up with revenues. And expenditures, I say minus 400, it probably is going to be somewhere between 0 and 200 to the good. And so on a net basis, just adding them up for a range, and Mr. Peterson being here, we're going to satisfy him and have a range and say it's somewhere between 300,000 and 1.2 million. Certainly, that range will narrow when we do the third quarter report and converge on a point by the end of the year. And then what else is out there besides FY24 budget development? This is an FY23 report. E&D certification for July 2022 is still in process. I communicated with them this week, and they are working on it. The student meals waiver, you may have read, that runs out in March, and the new governor has filed a bill that would extend it through the end of the year. There are a number of organizations who are trying to get it extended to FY24 and even potentially make it a permanent thing. The governor's budget is expected out legally by March 1st, possibly sooner than that. I've read that the governor wants to have information, perhaps not the entire thing, but things like involving local aid sooner than March 1st. We'll know at that point what our minimum aid rate will be for next year, any impact of the SOA, and if there are any earmarks. And the governor's budget, of course, is a proposal. The final budget isn't typically passed until June or July, but it gives us a starting point, and historically, at least in most recent years, a floor upon which they may increase aid subsequently. There's as some of you know, there's a capital needs report that's being produced as we speak. Most of their field work is done, and the report will be issued in upcoming months. Final reimbursement rates for some of our revenues, as I said before, will be out by the end of the year. We're working on, we discussed with the financial advisors on borrowing to complete the Douglas Gates School project. And as I said before, we're looking to include other borrowing and potentially to take care of some of our other capital projects. I've communicated with the Capital Improvement Subcommittee, and we'll hopefully get something underway to kind of nail down or crystallize what that might look like. And then finally, just general economics. There's a contract settlement that's in the works, and interest rates. As late as yesterday, the federal rate sometimes lags, or our investment rates sometimes lag the Fed rate, but the Fed did increase rates again yesterday, and so that could continue to benefit us. Our 30-year debt, I meant to put this slide in here, but I didn't. Our 30-year debt is locked in. We're in year 3, so 28 more years at an effective rate of 2.1%, and the money that we're earning is now double that. So we're doing well in that regard. And so last, and unfortunately, I know Kyra's head's going to shake, this was in the presentation last year. It was done to celebrate or recognize Mr. Peterson's leaving, and he was on the range as he was riding off. And so on the horizon was the title of my last slide, and that fit. But we'll go back to this. Thank you very much.
John Peterson has turned into a meme, and I just want to put that out there. I just want on the public record for it to just be saying that John Peterson's ghost just like hovers over this entire committee. Hello.
Watching from home.
Clearly. I'm sorry. Hello, Mr. Blumenthal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair to Director Verdolino. Quick question for you. How much money is encumbered, currently encumbered in FY23 we're in, correct? 22, 23. How much money, you spoke of encumbrances and freeing up some of that encumbered cash. How much is actually encumbered between now and the end of the year?
So some departments encumber, the personnel department encumbers whom they've hired at what rate. And so they encumber salaries. Not all departments encumber their projected costs. When I say encumbrances will be freed up, in some cases, For example, the facilities department could do a blanket PO to a supply company for $8,000 worth of parts, and that is their expected spend for the year. When they get near the end of the year and they've only spent $4,500, that $35 gets released. That's what I was talking about, not something that, not any one item of particularly high value that we say, oh, we're gonna disencumber that amount, drops to the bottom line.
Are there many encumbrances or PO, I should say, are there many open POs currently right now where there are large balances that you foresee turning around before the close of the fiscal year?
There are always open POs. Large balances, matter of semantics, not anything I would consider large. And typically, if you have, let's pick something that's a little bit bigger, a PO for $15,000 for something on an estimated basis for a service, and the invoice comes in for the service and it's $13,200. That would get disencumbered after the project is completed. A lot of those things, Ben, happen toward the end of the year.
Correct. I know in my previous role, I was going through and scrubbing a bunch of open POs to free up cash at the end of the fiscal year last year. So I'm just curious to see how much money is currently tied up in those POs.
I don't have an answer for you. If I can try to put some thought to how to answer your question in a meaningful way. Off the top of my head, I can't think of how that would be. Scrubbing the POs is a part of the normal process, and I don't know how right now I could tell you if there was, again, this hypothetical open PO for $5,000, how much of that will be spent or won't be spent from now till the end of June.
No, completely makes sense. I know sometimes when you open up POs for the ceiling amount of a contract, you're doing it to extend that purchase order out through the close of the fiscal year, but this is more inside baseball talk than I think a lot of folks really want to hear.
Possibly so. I will tell you that from the department head standpoint, if they don't encumber enough in their PO, it's a bit of an onerous process to reissue a PO and change the number. So they'd rather encumber more. That doesn't mean they're going to spend more than their budget, because they won't be allowed to encumber in excess of their budget. I trust the department heads that they have their eyes open and know how to manage their individual budgets with bottom line authority within their administrative area. And so if they happen to overcommit for a certain purchase, it's going to be at the expense of other things that they now can't buy. So they're pretty good at what they do.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Adam.
Thanks, Dave. I just have a quick follow-up to this. In one of the files that was sent to us tonight, which was the FY23 Q2 financial report, which is a spreadsheet that goes through all the main operating areas, there's one note there that indicates percent expended. Yes. Does that percent expended include the money that has been written in a PO or what's actually been paid out?
That's a good question. It's just expended. Okay. We didn't, because if I put encumbrances in there, again, because some departments do and some departments don't, they don't necessarily take a consistent approach to them. But if the money's out the door, the goods have been received, the services have been performed, and the money is out the door, that's a pretty good benchmark for me historically to think that most instructional departments should be in excess of 50%, because they should have ordered early during the summer and had materials on hand. Some departments are going to be pretty rateable. Probably special ed tuitions, which gets billed monthly, should come in around 50%. Utilities and facilities departments, where the costs are incurred ratably, should be about 50%. That number's in there as a guide, just to have a sanity check that we seem to be in the ballpark.
Great, thank you.
Any other deep probing questions about scrubbing POs? No other questions for Mr. Verdolino? Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Dave. We appreciate it. So Peter is going. Next item is to go back to FY24 budget. This is our third presentation, and this is going to be a deeper dive into ADK. I'm hoping that y'all read your packets on that one. All right, you ready to go, Peter? All right.
All right, so, hello, everyone. There was a memo in your packet, and what I wanted to do, knowing that we're in a period of transition with both our senior leadership, with Marie and Dave leaving, but also with our school committee members, one of my goals with this memorandum was to try in some type of a concise way capture the journey we've been on around the path to tuition-free all-day kindergarten. Marie has such a tremendous knowledge of this, and she knows all of the nuances to it. And it was really important to me that we do something that can kind of memorialize where we started, what that journey has looked like, and how we could possibly move forward from it. So that was really the intention of this memo, was to provide background, current status, and ways that we could look forward. Ultimately, what we're looking to do for this coming fiscal year is set a tuition rate for all-day kindergarten so that we can then communicate that to families. If you recall at the last meeting, we discussed a couple of different rates, and ultimately the committee indicated an interest in at least maintaining the same tuition rate for all-day K as we're currently charging. So a lot of the assumptions we went into this level of planning with were to maintain the current tuition rate, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we proceed. So there is a possible motion in the packet. I didn't put a rate there. That's really for the committee to determine. But I did put some language in. We have it as listed as a possible vote tonight. You're not obligated to vote that tonight. We do think it's important that you vote that at least at the next meeting, which is the budget workshop, because that also has to be your preliminary budget vote, which signals your intention over the final budget. And so the process that you use tonight up to that is going to be really important, but it's going to be very important that you set a rate before you take that preliminary budget vote because it's such an impactful part of the budget. If you recall, and I didn't do slides because I think the memo actually is intended to just speak for itself, but we have been working on all-day kindergarten really since 2019. And when we started this journey, we were charging $4,500 a student. When we looked as a leadership team with our principals and central office staff and also with school committee at the time, we looked at our core values around equity, but also the district strategy around creating more equitable opportunities and access for our students, as well as really just expanding the achievement of all of our students, quite honestly, and thinking about how we can better serve our students and their families. All-day kindergarten was an incredibly important component of that path and journey. So that really set the stage for the work that we did. And I'll say, we're having some real budgetary challenges this year. On the bright side of things, I will say that, since we started this journey, a few years ago, we've reduced tuition by 60%. And if you look at the enrollment in your packet, and I'll even go back a few years before 2017 when I started the comparison data. If you look back to 2014-15, 50% of our students were in all-day kindergarten, about 50% were in half-day. Right now, as of October 1st, we were at 95% of our students in the all-day kindergarten program, and since October 1st, we've actually transitioned about half of those students into full-day K. And, it was very important for us as we looked at our half-day K students. We've done it this year, we did it last year. We have a lot of communication with families to find out if the finances are any type of a barrier to students accessing all-day K, and if we find out it is, we just tuition, we waive the tuition and bring them into all-day K all throughout the year. So that's something that we've been doing for a couple of years. We'll certainly continue to do regardless of the outcome of this. But we are estimating right now that 97% or more of all of our kindergarten students are now full-day students. You'll see, and I'll pull up the first chart here, looking at kind of the historical tuition rates. And you can see, you know, a combination of the year, the tuition rate, how many students were in our full and half-day programs, our total enrollment, and then the percent of students in full day, and also classrooms. You're going to see a couple years of 11 classrooms here. The first 2 years we did this, we still followed the model we historically had, where students in a full-day program attended certain classrooms that were considered full-day classrooms, and other students attended half-day classrooms. And then, you know, they left, but they were very, very separate classrooms. What we found with our leadership team as we looked at that information and data is, in order to keep, you know, stable class sizes, we actually were having to turn students away from full-day kindergarten who were asking for it because we didn't have enough seats in our full-day classrooms. And so in 2019-20, we transitioned to hybrid classrooms so that any student who wanted full-day kindergarten could have full-day kindergarten. It also allowed us some flexibility with families that if they really wanted half-day, they could continue to follow that path. But it also provided the flexibility that if any point during a school year, a student decided they wanted to move from half-day into full-day, all they had to do was let us know, and we immediately transitioned the student into full-day kindergarten. So, you know, that was certainly a strategic decision we made. We have not really had the opportunity to go through a whole visioning process yet around what a full-day curriculum might look like. Our teachers have been amazing in terms of what they do with students, and we have now provided flexibility around how they schedule both academics and specials like art, music, physical education, where before we restricted that to morning. Now with so many students participating in a full-day program, we actually offer, you know, academics and specials throughout the entire school day, which is a change. Moving forward, as we move to, you know, really universal all-day kindergarten, we do want to think about what visioning we might entail to really think about how to move toward a play-based, full all-day kindergarten program that, you know, is aligned with some of the other work we've been trying to do as a district. So that certainly is on the horizon. We just have not gotten there yet. Any questions so far about information presented? And I know I'm going a little bit slowly through this, but I think the history of this is important to understanding where we want to go. Historical and projected costs of all-day kindergarten. We've talked a lot about revolving accounts and how much money we have to shift from one year to another in order to get to all-day kindergarten. But the one thing I'm not sure we ever really gave you was, what does all-day kindergarten cost in total? And how much of that are we paying through the revolving account, through tuitions, and how much is just built into the operating budget that can be relied upon? And then additionally, we wanted to track where have we used either excess and deficiency funds or ARPA money to be able to accelerate that path to reduce tuitions for families. So this chart here is intended to provide you with some of that background. All the financial disclaimers are above it. I'm not going to get into those right now. They're in your packet. But the chart is also kind of a nice story, because if you look back at 2016-17, we had about $655,000 in the operating budget and about $800,000 charged off to the revolving account. At this point of the year, we now have $1.3 million in our operating budget for the current year and just under $500,000 in the revolving account. We still are relying this year on ESSER funds for $200,000 of additional funding, but that's a real success story in our ability to shift some of those funds into the operating budget. We are certainly constrained in our ability to shift funds into the operating budget. You know, we've talked all year, and I know you're fully aware, but one of the two communities is up against its levy limit, so doesn't really have the flexibility of, you know, additional revenues from taxation that they can give to the district. And so we have to just be thoughtful about that and balance all of the different priorities we have as a school district around education, including tuition-free all-day K. We started to look forward into some projected models, and you know, what you're seeing here is just trying to show some type of a gradual path, how we can continue to build up the operating budget and reduce reliance on the revolving account. And you can see respectively, the operating budget, the second column is going up consistently by, you know, $150,000 or so a year. And you can see, you know, certainly declining, you know, revolving account. Ultimately, the ability, in my opinion, the single biggest lever we need to do in order to get to tuition-free all-day kindergarten is actually contained within how much money are we spending out of revolving, plus what are we offsetting out of one-time funds. So if we spend, you know, for example, this year, $480,000 in revolving funds plus $200,000 in ARPA money, or even next year's a better example, $397,000 out of revolving and $200,000 out of ESSER. That's the bottom line of what it would cost to immediately move to tuition-free all-day K. And that's the amount of money that would need to be brought into the operating budget where we don't create longer-term liabilities for the district. Any other model we use essentially, you know, is buying it almost on credit, because what we're doing is we're buying the tuition down temporarily in order to finance it out over time by gradually increasing the operating budget. One of the challenges we've seen as we've tried to do this is the operating expenses for all-day kindergarten are going to go up just like every other operating expense of the district. And it's largely salaries, and we know our salary line as a school district is typically increasing at about 4% a year. And so as we've projected out, you can see the all-in costs in the second to last column also increase over time. So the longer we take to get there, the more money it takes to get to that balance as well. And that's been a conundrum we've been grappling with.
Peter, before you move past that chart, can you just speak to why the 23-24 total change in cost is minus 4%?
Sure. We reduced a classroom.
Thanks.
Yeah. So here's a flip side. If we reduce a classroom, we actually accelerate the timeline because as costs go down, we're able to bring that into the budget. So that's really what you're seeing there. Great question. Thank you.
Would we be reducing the classroom by upping the numbers in the other classrooms? Is that?
No, we're actually just projecting, in this case, we're actually just projecting lower enrollment into the future. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Marie, would you just confirm that? You're my enrollment expert. Thank you. And, sorry, I have a Mac for the computer I use every day, and this is a PC, so every time I try to scroll, it's the wrong direction. As I mentioned, the all-in cost, if we wanted to go to completely tuition-free all-day K next year, is we have to come up with $597,000 to close that gap. That then has to figure its way into the budget. So that's one alternative, is just to figure out how to fund all-day K. If we want a longer-term plan that has, you know, a more gradual impact on the budget, we're obviously looking at something that has to be multiple years. And so we tried to create several different models for you because there's no one way to get there. In fact, 3 models is not all encompassing of all the different ways the committee might want to get to all-day K. But what I wanted to show you instead was how different levers impact the duration of time we have to charge kindergarten tuition to families. So in this first model, I went with the assumption that we were going to charge $1,800 a year. And so much thanks to Dave and Marie for really going through these numbers. And the 3 of us spent a lot of time making sure that we agreed on the numbers, the plan, and how we could move forward. I'm going to put a huge caveat. What we've found since we've started this is any projection we give is only good for that year. And as soon as circumstances change, the projection has to change. And so that's been frustrating for everyone, I think. But I just think it's worth noting that, you know, our numbers are only as good as the information we have in front of us. So this model is $1,800 tuition. If we do that, this plan is 4 years to tuition-free all-day kindergarten. It would require us adding 0.1% each year to the budget out of revolving funds. And so that's about $100,000 a year. And it actually has to take 6 years of steady increases of about $100,000. We previously have tried to do $180,000 a year. That was our first plan that we put in front of you. We haven't really been successful in finding $180,000 very often. I think we did once where we could make that shift. So we wanted to come up with something that maybe we thought was a little bit more realistic, especially in difficult economic circumstances, and that's why we chose the $100,000 a year. That's only a model, and that's really something the committee can determine that you might want a different path toward. So the three levers in here were the cost of tuition, the duration of this plan, and how much money it has to be added to the budget in order to get there. So this is $1,800, 0.1%, and it takes about 4 years, and you can see what that looks like over time. And you can see that even after we get to zero tuition, we still have to pay off the bill for 3 more years. The reason that we're able to take 3 years after we get to zero tuition is we have to build up the revolving fund to be able to then float those 3 years. So the balance of the revolving fund is really a critical indicator of how we actually get to tuition free, but not have to hit the operating budget with a huge sum of money in 1 year. And so when we talk about why do we want to charge a certain rate for tuition, it really also has to take into account how we can build up the balance of the revolving fund to then have a gradual step down over time. Was that a clear explanation of that? Okay, I want to make sure I'm clear, because this is, I think, an important element of understanding this one. The second plan we did, we also kept $1,800 a year, but I wanted to show what happens if the committee were to be able to find excuse me, more money in the operating budget. And so in this one, $1,800 tuition, we actually reduced the duration to 2.5 years. And with the final year, it's actually 3 years, but the final year is $1,000 instead of $1,800. But it required us to add, 0.1%, actually, 0.15% a year to the budget, or about $150,000. But what you can see is how much faster it actually knocks, a significant amount of time, and the last year is a lower level of tuition by having larger budget increases for that. Any questions on why those two things are happening? In the third one, and I know this is not the direction that the committee wants to take, but we wanted to just show you the other lever, which is tuition. And we didn't go in knowing what the impact of this would be, but you can actually see by increasing tuition early, you actually have a shorter duration that you have to charge tuition. Because, again, what you're doing when you raise tuition is you're increasing the revenue stream into the revolving account, which then allows you to end earlier and then float back into the budget over a longer period of time. So it really is a combination of levers that we're finding, we really want the committee to think about what that plan looks like over time. The bottom line to all of this is we do believe that we have sufficient funding to keep tuition at $1,800, which will continue a path toward all-day K. There are some other factors that we want to think about in this process. I put some information about Chapter 70 funds. Dave is our expert on Chapter 70 funds. Essentially, we're in something called hold harmless status, and we have talked about that before, but essentially that means we receive minimum aid from the state of $30 a student each year. So that's why when you see Chapter 70 increases and estimates from Dave year to year, we have roughly 5,000 students. We get minimum aid, $30 a student. That's our Chapter 70 increase, and so we get $150,000 a year more in Chapter 70 aid each year. Our kindergarten kids who pay tuition are only counted as half of a full-time equivalent student by state counts because they pay tuition. If we were to move to tuition-free all-day kindergarten, they would now count as a full-time student, and we would receive the proportional amount of increase in state funding through Chapter 70. I don't want you to spend this all in one place, but that is about $4,200. Right. It really, or if the state did what it did last year, where it actually set a higher level of minimum aid at $60, it's $8,400. It's not going to pay our kindergarten tuition bill right now. Well, right now, we have about 280 students in all-day kindergarten. They count as a half a student, so, 140 students is what we would get for the benefit, and at $30 a student, right? Just double check my math, Dave, right?
It's because we're at hold harmless, and so the only incremental Chapter 70 aid we would get is the $30 a student.
Yeah, so that's the frustrating part of it, is that doesn't necessarily do it. However, what we have talked about in the past is if we can at some point break through hold harmless status, quite honestly, and Dave is really the expert on this, and if you don't know, Dave was on the Foundation Budget Review Commission at the state level that actually led to the Student Opportunity Act being passed. So we have an expert in our midst. But if, we can time it correctly where the year before we could break through foundation enrollment, we actually go to tuition free, then going to tuition free actually could bump us into Student Opportunity Act money. And that way we could see some significant revenue coming back to the district. Is that a fair way of saying that, Dave?
Yeah, and I've not wasted time trying to model it until the governor's budget comes out, and at that point, I'm hoping to be able to show you when that changeover might be, but it's not going to be in FY24.
So are you saying that we get Chapter 70 funds for all of our all-day kindergarten kids, but they only count as half a kid for purposes of foundation budget annual increases? Okay.
Because they're paying tuition.
Right, but they are included in our student population for purposes of Chapter 70 funding. It's just the increases. Is that correct?
They're included at a half of the rate. If you charge tuition, then they only count as a half a student in the foundation budget.
So if, once we don't charge tuition anymore, do we get a big bump up in foundation because we have double? I mean, I know it's not that many kids, but still it should be significant, no?
It'll be very significant, and the foundation budget will go up by that amount. The problem is we are so far into hold harmless that bump in the foundation budget won't break through hold harmless yet. We need another couple of years like last year. I don't want to get in the weeds. It's complicated, but I think you understand.
Yeah, and so, what Dave didn't want to get into the weeds on, enrollment is one thing that can get us through hold harmless, but one thing we saw last year where the state actually carried a higher inflation rate in the budget, actually cut the gap that we have until we break through hold harmless. So, one thing we can also lobby the legislature, knowing that, there was a 14% rate increase for operational services vision, for, special education tuitions and transportation. We can also lobby that the interest rate carried in the next budget be reflective of actual inflation as opposed to the arbitrary cap. I believe it's in Student Opportunity Act of 4.5%, correct? So it's been following that arbitrary cap, or, and Dave made this suggestion as well, an alternate way to lobby would be if they don't want to increase beyond 4.5% as allowed by the Student Opportunity Act, they could actually just get, basically commit to continuing 4.5% increases in inflation until they've made up the gap to the actual inflation. Those would both be helpful strategies for Acton-Boxborough and many similar communities to be able to benefit of possibly getting to some of that Student Opportunity Act money. Is that correct, Dave? And that I've communicated to, some of our legislators as well as ways that they could also help advocate for district funds without, breaking the Chapter 70 formula that they really can't touch. The state dictates the Chapter 70 formula, but, advocating over inflation rates in that could be an important lever for us. in terms of budget implications and beyond, really, from a budget standpoint, this is really a committee decision. It's the tolerance that the committee has for increasing operating budgets, because that's a major lever in how we get to tuition-free all-day K by putting that money into the budget. And it's not just that we can increase the operating budget because we know we have limited funding. What it means is if we increase the operating budget right now for one thing, it means we have to prioritize that, but it means we have to deprioritize something else. And that's the challenge that we've really run up against this year, which is why we've struggled with trying to maintain a linear path toward tuition-free all-day K. And it might look more like steps as opposed to a straight line. When we started the process, and I thought this was important to get into the memo, we were actually in a much stronger financial position as a district. And, I came here, I actually didn't know what had happened because we had had 2 consecutive years of negative health insurance increases, which actually was a swing of $500,000 to the good on each operating budget. And now we're talking about $800,000 to $1 million to the bad on an operating budget. That's a significant swing. And so we started this path when we had negative health insurance increases. We also had historic highs in terms of district reserves. The good news is overall, our districts remain in a strong position with respect to reserves. However, we are in a period of declining reserves as well, and that bears watching. And so we have not recommended using additional reserves in the budget to fund it. The committee has all these levers at its disposal, but we are sensitive to being in a period of declining reserves as well as the challenges of our operating budget. And so we're just, we're taking a fairly conservative path as an administrative team, knowing that we also didn't want to impact our educator workforce, during a difficult time. So that's really where we were at. And, but again, we do believe we have the $1,800 to be able to support from a tuition standpoint. We're confident of that at this point after really looking at it. And so, I'm pleased I can at least come back to you and say, yeah, we can do this. But it certainly is going to mean trade-offs. I think, one of the things, knowing that, Dave and Marie are leaving and we're going to have transition in some of our central office leadership and school committee, it may actually be a good thing, not this year, but maybe for next committee, to actually get a working group together of some of the committee members and, the leadership in the district to really look at all-day kindergarten and, start fresh with how we want to get there and try and think of a plan, that's sustainable and flexible, because we know we're not on a linear trajectory here. But, so that would be another recommendation I would give the committee to think about for next year is form a group, and you'll let that group really dig into this and think about all the different levers at the committee's disposal so that when we get to next budget season, the committee feels confident that it's coming in with a recommendation about what it wants to do after that period of study, and feel like you have control over how that recommendation progresses. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Dave and Marie also. But hopefully that was helpful to understand not only the current status, but the history.
I think the last thing that you said kind of spoke to what I was going to ask about is we're looking at these projections and we know that we can't project out that far. We don't know what is going to happen with next year's budget. So in that case, if we're talking about putting together a working group to talk about how to fund this, then it kind of renders those projections moot, right?
In a way it does. I mean, we do have some things that we know are fact, which is Acton's against the levy limit, and that's going to limit revenue from local taxes. I think it can continue to build support for how we might advocate for different, whether it's at the state level or, even thinking about building understanding in the community about why all-day kindergarten is really important, and having a communication plan around that is something that's important because, we're in a community right now where, we have 13 grades of families who have paid for all-day kindergarten if they wanted it. And, when you start to talk about tuition-free all-day K, some people may, feel very comfortable saying, yes, that's a good thing. But I think there are other members of the community who may look at that and say, well, I paid for it. I understand it was just something I had to pay for. It was less than childcare at the time. And I think there's a real need to also build up an understanding of why early education is so critical. We know that kids' brains are at their most malleable stages between the ages of 3 and 5, and we have to take advantage of that and leverage it. But it certainly is going to require community education about why we believe in it and also how we can finance it. So I think there's some general support for that. I think it's also letting, the committee feel in control of that process to get to all-day kindergarten, where I think, we've been trying on an annual basis, but the administration keeps having to come back, and every year the numbers are different, which I think is frustrating as well. But to really be able to have a group on the committee who walks through that process and understands the numbers, and on an annual basis can look at the bigger budget picture, but meld that with the goal of getting to tuition-free all-day K, and be able to come as, representatives of the community back to the committee and say, yeah, we've looked at this, we have this goal, here's why it's important, and here's what we're recommending for this year for the following reasons.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think what I've been sort of turning over in my head is how do we make sure that whatever path we've chosen is stuck to? Because I think that's where a lot of the frustration comes from, is not necessarily that we have to charge for kindergarten, which is frustrating, but the fact that it's so volatile and we don't know what the future brings. So it would be nice to pick a path and then find a way to make sure that that is prioritized and we don't have to keep, talking about it every budget season. And then the other element of that too is I'd like to see us starting to, like you mentioned at the last meeting last week, thinking about how to do universal pre-K, because that's really what we should be spending our time thinking about.
Yeah, and I think the committee, has an opportunity to do that also through budget subcommittee each year when the committee develops its budget guidelines with administration, because that really is the directive that the committee gives to us as administrators in the priorities of the committee. And so this year, I think the budget sub recognized early that finances were going to be challenging. And so all-day K was in the guidelines, but it was based on available funding. If the committee says that needs to be a first priority in those budget guidelines, what that's going to mean to administration is that's the priority, and we need to lower the priority of other agenda items. And so I think that's where it's an important discussion of the committee to think about. We have a lot of priorities, and we have a big community with a lot of people who are passionate about education and care deeply about it, but may not always agree on a priority. And so that's what this committee is for ultimately, right, is to figure out how to take that all in and develop priorities. But capital has been a priority for us. Personnel this year was a priority for us. MTSS has been a priority for us, certainly. Providing, English language services and special education services have been priorities, and thinking about building out special education programs that are responsive to kids' needs, and all day K is a priority. At some point within, limited finances, something's going to have to give. And so that's, I think, going to be the important discussion that we have.
I know this is outside of this budget, but as long as we're talking about all of the things, do we still have the items, like now that Dave has looked at the revenues and all that other kind of stuff, are all the things that were still on the chopping block at our last meeting still on the chopping block? Like, are we still losing the science? Okay.
Yeah, there's been no shifts and changes since last week in
Okay.
terms of any other projections that we have.
Okay, thank you.
First, thanks to Peter, Dave, and Marie, and the whole team that put this together. I think it's really helpful both to memorialize it, to put the numbers out in front for everyone to see, and to come back to us and be able to present the flat tuition from last year to this year. I think that shows great responsiveness to the request of the committee. It looks like this year you're carrying $66,000 into the operating budget to support, so we were also able to find a little bit of money to bring in.
Yeah, we started looking at how expenses were categorized, and in general, the way that we've done this is between the revolving fund and the general fund, or the operating budget, we've carried a certain percentage of all of our staff salaries. So roughly, I think it's 70% of all of our, teachers and assistants salaries are charged to the operating budget, correct, Marie? and about 30% are charged to the revolving account at this point. We also found that like the district registrar was charged to the revolving account for kindergarten, which logically makes sense because, you know, one of the biggest functions of a district registrar is for kindergartners coming in. But as we talked about it, it's also something we can clean up because registration is just an operating function. So we brought in that for the following year, all the way into the operating budget. It's not a big amount, but it's certainly something. And then we also have some materials and supplies and things like that that we felt just better belonged in the operating budget than in that. And so, you know, there's always some shifting that goes around in personnel, and we were able to, you know, just identify enough gap to make some headway next year.
I think that's great. I really appreciate that. You know, my thought here is very similar to what it was the first year we voted for this, all the way up until this year, which is we put together a budget and a kindergarten plan that allows us to continue to fight for the next year. And so I look at this as a win to say we're going to be able to keep the tuition flat for next year. We have a plan, but I know full well that should enrollment in kindergarten tick up and we have to add another classroom, the whole plan goes out the window again. So, I mean, I think we just have to look at this year and say, it was a very difficult year. We still put it on our budget guidelines. We tried our best to do what we could. We were at least able to keep it flat, which was not sort of where we began the meeting last week. So I would take this as a win and recognize that even if we put a subcommittee together next year to evaluate this and put together a plan, you know, 2 months later, that plan could go out the window, and it could be for the better or for the worse. We could add a classroom, or we could get a windfall of millionaires' tax money that could solve this for us. So, you know, for me, fingers crossed, right? For me, I would support the tuition, voting the tuition tonight at $1,800 for next year, knowing that we're able to, you know, stay on, meet our commitment and stay on the path to get to all-day free K.
Just a real quick one. So if you have to add a section, in my view, it doesn't blow up the plan. If you have to add a fourth grade section because we had 30 students incredibly move in that were all fourth graders, you have to plan for that in the budget. And so this plan assumes X number of sections. If there's an inflow of kindergartners, you are going to have to fund that position anyway. The positions that are left in the budget this year, that's a constant. If enrollment happens to go down further, then as Peter said before, it happens to facilitate it. But if enrollment goes up, you're going to have to find a way to hire that teacher anyway. So I think the basis of it still works. That said, I do think that if you have this framework, you're able to revisit it pretty quickly from year to year and gauge the glide path, if you will, to tuition-free all-day K.
Thank you. I mean, I'd be so interested in hearing from our kindergarten teachers, especially those who have been with us for, you know, a bunch of years about, you know, what they see as the differences. And just want to offer, you know, I agree with a lot of the things that Adam said. I just want to offer, I had a meeting with the Executive Director of Strategies for Children and the Deputy Director last Friday. Strategies for Children is an advocacy organization for early childhood education in Massachusetts that I handed out the fact sheet for all-day kindergarten, which you will note is several years old. And they are, you know, engaged now in assisting districts with moving to universal early childhood education. And, you know, as we know, we're one of the very few holdout districts who still don't offer universal all-day kindergarten. So, you know, they have a wealth of knowledge. They've offered to come and, you know, talk to this committee or anybody else about, you know, answer questions. And they're also, you know, we walked away from that meeting with, you know, both with sets of to-do lists. I think that it's really worth continuing to advocate, if for no other reason than, you know, we're going to be as the years go forward, at a competitive disadvantage with other districts and other towns who have much more expansive offerings for young children. I mean, it's the right thing to do, but it's also the right thing to do for our property values and, you know, the health of our town. So, you know, I throw that out there. I know we're overwhelmed with items right now. I'm also hopeful, as I've said before, with the new administration. I'm meeting with our newly sworn-in state rep, Simon Cataldo, tomorrow. And, you know, we're going to have a new leadership at the Department of Education, at the Department of Early Education. So, you know, I think that for this year, you know, we're doing the best we can to keep tuition where it is. I hate that, but I don't have any better ideas that I can pay for. So that would be my, you know, that would be what I would settle for this year, but without letting off the pressure, because I think this is really important for so many reasons, and, you know, especially for our youngest learners and their families. Thank you.
Wanted to clarify, we were going to vote only for the next year, right? Not the model 1, 2, 3, whatever the options, right? Multi-years.
Yeah, that's an annual decision the committee needs to make around tuition.
Okay, so the budget pressure actually for either three options is the same, actually, right? So
This is this works within our projected budget.
okay.
Just going to make a motion, and then if it's seconded, then we can still have discussion. I'd move to set the all-day kindergarten tuition at $1,800 per student for the 2023-24 school year.
Second.
Hello, y'all. I just want to open this up and make sure there's nobody in the audience who has something they want to add to this discussion. Okay. No other comments from this committee? Okay, very good. So a motion has been made and seconded. So all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed or abstentions? And the motion passes unanimously. So tuition was just set at $1,800 for next year. Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, everybody. Okay. So then we are moving on to subcommittee member reports. And then usually I get a little list of everybody who is going to make a report, and I don't have that. So does anybody have reports to be made? Anybody? Nobody? Going once, going twice. Okay, very good. So then, we are going with our consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion in a separate vote. I will read each item name, and if any member would like it held, please say hold. Members do not have to have attended a meeting to vote on the minutes. So, approval of our minutes from 1/26/23. Okay, cool. Well, we're not.
We got to do the whole.
We got to do the whole.
I'm sorry.
There's only one other thing, which is approval of $1,200 donation from the ABR PTSO and ABR High School for Community Service Awards Night. Very good. So then, motion to approve.
Seconded.
Very good. So that was Ginny and that was Ben. And so all those in favor?
Aye.
No nays or abstentions. Very good. All right, so that all passed unanimously. Thank you so much. Who's got warrants for me?
I do.
Thank you, Adam.
I move that the school committee vote to approve the below-listed warrants totaling $9,218,040.88. AP vendor warrant as follows: 23-015, dated 1/19/2023, in the amount of $4,756,828.62. 23-15A, dated 1/19/2023, in the amount of $50.05. 23-15B dated 1/26/2023 in the amount of $306,155.44. Payroll vendor warrant as follows: 23-015PR dated 1/26/2023 in the amount of $1,214,087.22. And finally, payroll warrant as follows: P2315 dated 1/26/2023 in the amount of $2,940,919.55.
Second.
I'm going to give it, I'm going to give it to Amy. I heard her first. So that was Adam, and then it was Amy. Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed, et cetera? Very good. Before we enter into executive session, Peter, is there anything that you would like to highlight in the FYI?
Just as I mentioned earlier, we have some information about some of the district's work around the genocide education bill in the FYI section of your packet that may be of interest. We also have a couple of opportunities posted in the packet. One is for the Green Advisory Council meeting that Senator Eldridge hosts that may be of interest as well. And there is youth mental health and first aid training being provided through partnership with the town of Acton, and we're including that in the FYI as well. And then we have the election calendar.
Thank you, Peter. All right, so we have need tonight for an executive session to be convened under MGL Chapter 30A, Section 21A, Purpose 3, to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the Acton-Boxborough Education Association, ABEA, because an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the committee. The school committee will not return to open meeting. Would anybody like to make a motion?
So moved.
Whoa.
Like whack-a-mole.
Let's try that again. Who would like to make a motion, y'all?
So moved.
Thank you, Adam, and then Ben. We will need to do a roll call vote. Evelyn? Andrew? Aye. Yevon? Yes. Ginny? Yes. Amy?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Tessa?
Yes. Sounds good.
Then it passes. We're going into executive session. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good evening.